Kula Vinaka, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up.
So far, it looks like the impact directly on our shores has been minimal.
Samoa locals fear damage from the sunken Navy ship. Also, a research centre looks into housing equity for Māori and Pacific peoples. And later on.
And so if we can buy species like the sea heck, we can start to reverse this extinction trend.
The Guam kingfisher bird takes flight again. A tourism operator in Samoa says they're concerned about the negative impacts any oil or chemical spillage from the wreck of the HMNZS Manawanui will have on the environment. All crew from the New Zealand Navy vessel, which ran aground on a reef off the south coast of Upolu near Maninoa on Saturday evening, were safely rescued by local authorities. Authorities in Samoa are working with their New Zealand counterparts to assess the site of the wreck. Koroi Hawkins reports.
A manager at the Coconuts Beach Club at Maninoa, Brian Rose, says the Manawanui initially ran aground on a reef not too far from their resort. Mr. Rose says the vessel then drifted for a while before catching fire and finally sinking.
I had seen a flare go off towards the west. I didn't realize it was from that ship, but then I found out in the morning about the problem and the rescue, and then I saw a lot of smoke coming from it, and it looked very strange. I didn't know what was going on with that, and then later it's gone.
Samoa's acting Prime Minister, Tuala Te Vanga Iosefo Bonifacio, says an oil spill is likely after the New Zealand Navy ship ran aground south of Upolu Island.
The HMNZS Manawanui is not recoverable and has sunk into the ocean. The possibility of an oil spill is high probable. NEOC, led by MNRE, is now conducting an environmental impact assessment on the marine ecosystem and surrounding areas.
Tuala says he visited the 75 crew members from the specialist dive and hydrographic ship to give them moral support yesterday. An Air Force Hercules arrived in Apia overnight on Sunday to start bringing the crew home. New Zealand Defence Minister Judith Collins says those who needed hospital treatment had been released and would be making their way home today.
They'll be pretty shocked, but yesterday I was told that they were in a feeling of almost relief and almost euphoria given what they had been through, that they had survived it. But I think today they'll be starting to come down from that.
RNZ Pacific was unable to speak with the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Works, Fui Tupai Mau Simonu, who is the Samoa government's designated spokesperson for the incident. The head of one local environmental group that RNZ Pacific spoke to said they're supportive of the government's efforts but want to get out and see how things in the area are for themselves before making any public statements. Mr. Rose says they're concerned about the potential impacts of the disaster on their lagoon.
So far, it looks like the impact directly on our shores has been minimal, but we know that with tides and currents, things change, and so we're going to keep an eye out to make sure if there's any problems that we know about them and prevent our guests from getting in the water if it's going to be unsafe.
Government officials in Samoa that RNZ Pacific contacted also apologized for delays in getting responses as the country is in the final stretch of preparations to host leaders from over 50 Commonwealth countries in Apia for the Heads of Government meeting, which is to be opened by King Charles. In fact, the Sinalei resort, where His Royal Highness is reportedly to be accommodated, is one of those closest to the final resting place of the ill-fated HMNZS Manawanui.
A Pacific researcher is seeking better solutions for Māori and Pacific families to live in healthy, sustainable and affordable homes. Dr. Karamia Mula, who's the co-director of the Māori and Pacific Housing Research Centre, or MAPIHI, says that a conversation that doesn't occur as often is about the needs and aspirations for Māori and Pacific housing. Pacific families bear the brunt of poor housing through conditions such as rheumatic fever, which thrives in cold, damp conditions, and older, poorly insulated housing stock. I spoke with Dr. Mula and began by asking her what MAPIHI aims to do.
Thank you. That's a great question. Māpahi is the Māori and Pacific Housing Research Centre. It's a university-level research centre that focuses on Māori and Pacific housing research. It's a transdisciplinary centre, so that really just means that we work across the university, across disciplines, with external stakeholders on research.
And what's your personal experience of the housing situation? Did that influence you to lead you to where you are today with your work?
Yes, very much so. I've been fortunate in my family that we've had a degree of housing security. My parents own their own home, and they sort of set that kind of example. But I'm a bit younger, I should say, than some of my siblings, and noticing the difference of noting the difference between their experience of housing and my experience of housing has definitely influenced me into being interested in this area, and then also seeing in my own community the flow-on effect, the impact of housing security for Pacific people and housing quality for Pacific people, particularly young Pacific people.
You wrote in your opinion piece that there's not often a conversation about the needs and aspirations for Māori and Pacific housing, yet the stats show Pacific people have poorer health outcomes due to poor quality housing. Who would you say are reluctant to have those conversations? I'm
not sure if I would use the word reluctant, but I would use the word the focus has been on what the general New Zealand population experiences. And that, to a point, has been, there's sort of, in a way, I guess, their experience has not been at the same crisis point as it has been for Pacific people. Now that it is becoming now that it's become such a crisis for everyone, you're hearing the same sort of things that Pacific people were saying 60 years ago. The housing quality is not suitable, it's tough, it's expensive. So we've been having that discussion since Pacific people sort of arrived, mass migration. It was one of the key focuses of community leaders for a long time. So, I think we have to advocate for our housing needs and aspirations, because I think people are focused on their own housing, their own access to housing at this current moment.
But how important is location when it comes to developing these houses for a Pacific community? The reason why I ask this is because, I noticed that any sort of housing development that's put in an area where there's high income earners, there's a strong reaction. So is location needed to be taken into consideration?
Absolutely. Location is key for a number of reasons. First reason that comes to me, and this is not a new idea, many other Pacific researchers have said this before, but we are unevenly impacted by gentrification. So you see these kind of cycles where Pacific people move into an area where the location and the housing associated with that location is inexpensive. That area then becomes desirable, and Pacific people have to move out. They've already built infrastructure and contributed to that area, and they have to leave it behind. And I think one of the examples that in the Auckland or Tamaki Makaurau instance is thinking about some of those secondary schools that families travel to for hours from South Auckland that are in the city suburbs. Those schools are Pacific for a reason, because those neighbourhoods were Pacific for a moment. So when you push people into, outlying suburbs, greenfield developments, you also push them into more travel time, more travel expenses. Secondly, I personally think that housing intensification, which is building at a higher density, that is one of the levers around housing affordability. Well, certainly that's one of the levers that's widely cited within housing research. So I do think when we talk about density and where that density is, we do have to, I think transparent discussions about why certain densities it's in certain areas and which people are being displaced for why, for what reason. I think those are more transparent discussions to have.
Do you think, though, that the discussion around having houses specifically for Māori and Pacific can be seen as divisive?
Well, I can only comment on my perspective, which is the health of Māori and Pacific people depends on the health of their housing. My hope is that all New Zealanders are invested in Māori and Pacific people living well, because when Māori and Pacific people live well, we all live well.
A conservation group responsible for reintroducing the Guam kingfisher bird hopes it'll shed light on other endangered Pacific bird species. The bird, known as the nine sea heck, were removed from Guam into captivity before the point of complete extinction due to the threat of the brown tree snake on the territory. This release marks the first time since the 1980s these beautiful birds are living in the wild. Alicia Foon spoke with Alex Wegman of the Nature Conservancy about his work to revive bird populations.
So Palmyra Atoll is a conservation site that is 1,000 miles south of Hawaii. It's in the Central Pacific, just north of the equator, and it's a fantastic place. It has been in conservation management for almost a quarter century now. It is jointly owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's managed as a Nature Conservancy preserve with a research station, and that's within a National Wildlife Refuge, which is also then within a Marine National Monument. So it's probably one of the best protected places on Earth. Palmyra, while it was heavily disturbed during World War II, with a lot of species introductions and dredging and a bunch of other actions there, it is now an incredibly healthy ecosystem. Rats have been removed. Rats were introduced during the World War II period. Rats have since been removed. And it is now free of invasive predators. And so I think that's one of the key attributes of Palmyra that make it a suitable site for rewilding the sea heck. That in addition to the suitable habitat of Palmyra. Palmyra is full of the appropriate prey species for the sea heck: cockroaches, grasshoppers, crickets, dragonflies, those kind of little creepy crawly things that the kingfishers like to eat. And then it also has the appropriate nesting habitat. The reason why we are releasing sea heck on Palmyra and not on Guam, the bird's island home, is that Guam still is subject to brown tree snakes, which were introduced sometime, we think, right after World War II, and have since then just been suppressing and in fact extirpating the island's native bird species, and the sea heck was one of those.
That's wonderful. And when do you think these birds will be able to be reintroduced to Guam? What efforts are being made to make it a safer place for sea heck?
While the sea heck are now exploring their wild home at Palmyra, there is a very concerted and large effort to continue to figure out how to effectively control and mitigate the impacts from brown tree snake on Guam. It's an objective that the local Guam agencies and federal partners have been focused on for decades, and they're making progress. I'm not directly involved in that, so I can't speak to specifics, but I do know that brown tree snake control it's a huge objective of the conservation community on Guam and on the Pacific, because brown tree snakes, from Guam represent a threat if they were to be introduced to other island ecosystems. So there's a lot of attention on the brown tree snake problem on Guam.
And this is quite an amazing feat for conservationists and people that are passionate about keeping these birds alive and from extinction. But could you kind of explain to us what the significance is to you and to the team?
Great question. So we are in the middle of an extinction crisis globally. We're seeing biodiversity losses around the world in all types of ecosystems. And birds are one of the most heavily impacted groups of animals within this extinction crisis. And so with the Guam kingfisher, the CHEC rewilding project at Palmyra, we of course are very excited about what this means for this particular species. It's the first wild population in more than 3 decades, and it's a significant step towards the ultimate objective of returning this bird to Guam, to the ecosystem and the people on Guam. What does this mean globally for conservation and biodiversity protection? This is a proof point. It's the project continues to be successful. What this shows is that we can take bold steps to protect biodiversity, and we should be doing that. And we know that technology is going to change. New tools will become available, and problems that we face today, like the predation of birds by brown tree snakes on Guam, may likely be solvable tomorrow. And so if we can buy species like the CHEC a little bit more time and allow us to solve some of the really hard problems that are in front of us, we can start to reverse this extinction trend. And so I think that's, for me, that's what the CHEC project represents, is a hope spot for biodiversity protection.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.